to our live stream. My name is Graham Bodie. I'm the Chief Listening Officer at Listen First Project. Hopefully you've found our page either on Facebook or YouTube and perhaps Twitter. We are just so blessed today to be able to have this conversation about Listen. It's motivated by the movie by that name, but more than anything, we want to really just start a discussion and a conversation about the importance of that activity in general, particularly in the moment that we find ourselves. So we've been promoting the film for the past couple of weeks. Hopefully, if you've had a chance to watch it, we're kind of monitoring those comments on Facebook and the different platforms. So feel free to put those comments in and questions for the folks on the call. You'll see here on the call as well, we've got the writer and director, Aram Christopher. We're also joined today here by a co-founder and chief encouragement officer of Someone to Tell It To, Michael Gingrich.
Hi.
Welcome, guys. Thank you for joining today. We'll also be joined here today throughout the hour by Tom Caden, also another co-founder and chief encouragement officer of Someone to Tell It To, and some of the actors are going to pop in. I'm going to have to monitor this Zoom waiting room for that. So those logistics aside, we really want to start here with Aram and kind of maybe bounce some ideas off each other. Aram, you describe yourself as a filmmaker, as an author, as a speaker who creates content to bridge social divides. Tell us a little bit about your trajectory. How'd you get into this space?
Well, it was really quite unorthodox. I am actually a fourth generation of a farming family, so getting into this space was quite a diversion from where I came from. But it started for me actually from the impact of a national tragedy, which was the Columbine High School shooting back in 1999. When that happened, I had just finished college about 9 months prior. And essentially when it happened, I think like the rest of the country, I was trying to figure out why. And what really surprised me is that nobody was asking the youth that question. The feedback when we were trying to figure out that answer, a lot of the direction was focused on experts like psychologists, counselors, and overall adults. And so I thought that there was an opportunity to really give youth a voice. And so I created a project giving 5 diverse youth cameras and let them film a year in their life. And at the time I hadn't gone to film school and really didn't know what I was doing, but I felt like there was a need to essentially represent this youth voice. And so what started back in 1999, which was an experimental project, slowly evolved into a company and a mission to essentially create content that provokes people to shift their perspective and hopefully change their behavior in a positive way. So that original footage that the students shot turned into a 4-part educational film series. And then shortly after that, I was speaking and traveling around the United States, Canada, and parts of Europe, speaking with youth about these issues, adults, educators. And after 10 years of doing that and reaching over 1 million people, I realized that media has a really incredible power to get people to kind of see themselves and others differently. And you see it being used in commercials all the time to basically get people, provoke people to buy something. And I always believe that we could use that same concept in a meaningful way and provoke people to hopefully look at other people differently, see themselves differently, and change how they're behaving. And so now really what I'm focusing on is long form content like Listen, feature length films and documentaries and scripted that also have educational components to them. So you can position these films as really a stealth-like tool. And what we've seen with Listen is the power to provoke very powerful conversations that get people to bridge those social divides that maybe they don't necessarily see, but since they have an opportunity to look at others differently and see themselves differently, they start to understand those differences better and they start to have more meaningful conversations that start to unite those differences that maybe they weren't aware of before. So hopefully that illustrates a little bit of the direction, a little bit long-winded, but it's been, gosh, I would say almost 20 years of work in education, in mental health. And I never thought I'd be going in this direction, but every time I interact with youth or adults about this subject, it really kind of fuels my fire to keep going and try to focus on some of those difficult questions that need to be answered and bridge those divides that really need to be bridged.
Yes, it's, you said you didn't go to school, you didn't go to film school at that point, and you just kind of had this, you were just motivated. You just wanted to do something and to include voices that weren't necessarily being included. What did you go to school for, just out of curiosity?
I actually had an acting scholarship. So I studied acting and directing for theater, and then I did a double major in communications. And then I eventually went back to school, film school.
Yeah, so it's not like you were a physics major and it's way out in left field. You definitely have some background here in the film industry, so to speak. So, I've been inspired by your work ever since I ran across this particular film, and then started, doing my due diligence to figure out who is this guy, why is he doing this film, what is it about, Aram that is inspiring him to do that film. So I do want to talk specifically about that film and really what motivated you to make that. I mean, you said the Columbine motivated you to give youth cameras and go out and tell their stories, and that sort of launched a trajectory into this educational space. What was it that kind of same motivation? That was there a precipitating event that caused you? Like, what was it that why listening as a subject of a film?
Great question. So when I started speaking in schools and presenting these educational films that I created from this I realized that the one thing that I kept hearing over and over again from students, and I heard it when I was interviewing the students while they were filming, was the statement that no one really listens to me. And I still hear it today. And to be honest with you, Graham, at the time, what I thought these students were saying, because I hadn't really deep dove into the subject of listening, I thought they were saying no one really hears me. So one of the concepts of our organization was, let's give youth a voice. Let's challenge them to think differently and empower them to make a difference. And I think, honestly, I had it really wrong, because, you can elevate someone's voice as loud as you want, but if people aren't listening, it won't make a difference. And I realized that definition of the word listen, I had it all wrong. I mean, if you deep dive into where the root of the word listen comes from, you'll find that it comes from a Germanic word, halisnen. And what that word simply means is pay attention to. It doesn't say pay attention with your ears or your eyes or your head or your heart. It just says pay attention. And so what I started to realize is that in all the work that I was doing, maybe I could rethink it. And also, maybe what these students were saying is not that no one hears me, but that no one's paying attention to me. And so that became the kind of birth of this concept for listen, where I know the title, people like, well, the title is listen, like what? But it really made me realize that over time, I started to realize that I didn't learn how to listen properly. My parents never sat me down and said, hey, let's teach you how to listen. But it's ironic because as a parent, and I have 2 children, one of the things that we're constantly telling our children is, why aren't you listening? And you need to listen to me. But when in their lives do we sit them down and really teach them how? And so the film, I think on the surface, people look at it and say, okay, this is a teen drama. Or, okay, I get it. But when you watch the film, hopefully the intention is to see how in our lives there are so many moments that we miss to pay attention, to truly see, hear, think, and feel what another person is going through. And I think that now more than ever, it's so paramount. And I think technology over time has altered how we pay attention. And we need to go back to basics.
That's so powerful. I mean, yet I don't think it's one of those terms that everybody thinks they understand. It's one of those skill sets that everybody, thinks is important. And so when you ask people, how important is listening and how often do you have to do it and what amount of time during your day do you spend listening, all these kind of questions, right? Everybody raises their hand and says it's important. Everybody says they spend a lot of time doing it. And then, of course, the follow-up question is, how much time have you spent cultivating that skill? And you see people's faces drop, and you see people sort of reflect and think, well, none. I might have taken a public speaking class in high school or college. I may have done a basic interpersonal communication class somewhere in college. But even in those classes, listening, if it's taught at all, is a little sliver, a little part of one of the chapters in the textbook. And it's not really covered all that much. And so we say things like, listen up, and we tell parents that their kids are such wonderful listeners, but what that usually means is they're obedient. They wash their hands when we tell them to, and they stand in line when they're supposed to. And there's this conflation of listening with obedience, and then of course comprehension is just, it's like reading comprehension. We're just wanting people to just remember everything. And we don't realize that there's much more of the human side. And that's really why I'm excited that Michael is representing Someone to Tell It To, because that's really what Someone to Tell It To and other organizations like that are trying to communicate to the public. So Michael, tell us a little bit about what you do. The simple fact that your logo for Someone to Tell It To, if people go out and look for it, is an ear but a heart. So you guys get fundamentally that there is little separation between the heart and the ear. So just tell us a little bit about what you do, why you do what you do, what motivated you to do, and how you see your organization kind of plugging in to opportunities like this movie, Listen.
Wow. Well, first of all, what you both said, everything you both said, resonate with very strongly and profoundly, actually. We find that there is, first of all, there's just an epidemic of loneliness that's going on in our culture today, not just in the United States, but around the world. It doesn't matter the culture for the most part. There's an epidemic of loneliness. And as Aram said, we are just so technologically connected with one another in so many ways like we've never been before. But yet emotionally, relationally, we are more disconnected than ever. Studies will show that, and you can see that we just don't know how to have more intimate and thoughtful and deep conversations and connections and relationships with people. And that's why Someone to Tell It To was started, because we realized that there was this lack and there was this problem. It's its own pandemic. Especially within the last 30 years, the statistics and studies will show that fewer and fewer people have fewer and fewer people in their lives with whom they feel safe and can trust, can open up to, and just be, have deep conversations with and are known by these people. So we want to do something about that. And Someone to Tell It To, our mission is to create meaningful relationships through compassionate listening, and then also to train people to do the same thing. We find that people say that, yes, listening is important in many ways, but when we tell them what we do, too many times we've gotten the comment, oh, so you just listen? And so listening is, it's actually diminished. There are people who don't think of it as a skill, perhaps, or don't think of it as all that important in many ways, and that it's important enough to actually make a career out of, or a life out of, really paying attention to that and trying to do it with intentionality. So, that's why we're doing it, because we want to show people a different model, because we're actually dying emotionally, but also physically, because of loneliness. And again, the statistics will continue to show that how loneliness affects heart disease, cancer, and it is a huge contributing factor to mortality. And
I don't think people realize that connection at all. That when you go to the physician and she runs down, does your belly hurt or can you see straight? There's no questions about connectivity and relationships and whether you have somebody to tell it to at home. And yet, the degree to which you have close personal contacts, the degree to which you have rich social networks, is as strong, if not stronger, a predictor of other causes of mortality, like smoking a pack of cigarettes a day and over drinking and being overweight. There's some really good research over the past several years that shows the importance of relationships, not just to make you feel better and all gooey and sticky on the inside, but and those are good things, and not only to benefit your mental health, which is a good thing, but your physical health as well.
Right.
That there's so many benefits to having people in your life who connect with you and who you can go to, as you guys say, when you have someone to tell it to. And I think that's the key, one of the key themes in the film, Aram, is this: what happens when you don't have that?
Mm-hmm. Well, and one thing, it's great to just, Michael, this is the first time we've connected and we're all speaking the same language, and yet we're coming at it from different perspectives, and I love it. And one thing, with what's going on today that I've been thinking a lot about with the COVID virus is, what segment of the population is most at risk? And it's the elderly. And what I find very interesting that nobody has really highlighted is that we're going to the immediate assumption that the elderly are most at risk because of the fact that they're older and maybe they have pre-existing conditions, but nobody has mentioned the correlation or the connection to the idea that maybe many of the elderly are actually in a position of loneliness too, and lack of connection. And does that have, when you're talking about how loneliness has detrimental impacts on a person's health, is there any kind of correlation with that fact as well?
Well, actually, we believe that there is a huge correlation, and you're absolutely onto something. A person we quote a lot is Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was the former Surgeon General of the United States. He happened to serve in the Obama administration, and he is now constantly writing about, talking about, sharing these kinds of statistics, how loneliness is affecting our physical health, and we're not paying enough attention to that. And one of the underlying dilemmas or factors in this whole in the COVID pandemic is there is also this isolation and social pandemic as well that is affecting people in an even greater way, and that needs to be looked at and paid attention to.
Yes, I mean you're absolutely, the point is just so resonant in some conversations just I was in today. I mean, the pandemic doesn't hit all people in all communities and all types of people the same. It's not equally distributed across the population. I'm fortunate enough, as well as you guys are, to have access to broadband and a camera and a computer, and I can connect to people. I'm married with 2 children, and my wife and I still have employment. And so our lives are a little crazier, but we have jobs, and we have kids that have a school district, so I mean, you could sit here and go on and on and on about the fact. So we like to say also that just like the pandemic isn't treating all people equal, that we're all in this together, but really not all in this together. Very similarly, listening isn't equally distributed across the population, right? And so, some would critique these kind of efforts as well, who gets to have the convenience and the affordance of paying attention to listening as a skill, as opposed to when your needs aren't met, right? And so how can we make sure that this message is resonant regardless of socioeconomic and other factors that might influence the degree to which people are able to even think about, and these are just the issues, right? That how do we lift all communities up, and how do we teach how do we teach and resonate with all communities? And I think that's the kind of impact, Aaron, that you want to have with this film. So can you talk a little bit about the impact that you've seen in the different communities that you've shown this film in?
Sure. So actually, when the film was in its fine cut form, meaning not completely done, we actually convinced the investors to allow us to show the film for free for 9 months. And we ended up reaching about 25,000 people in 15 states and 3 provinces in Canada. And we were able to collect data pre and post just to understand how it was reaching the audience. For me as a filmmaker, that's such an important thing. I want to know what the impact is. And we made it mandatory that if you were going to screen the film for free, that you actually had to facilitate a discussion following the screening and then complete the data. And what we found is that the film was actually making people feel less lonely, predominantly youth. The film was inspiring people to be a better person. It was inspiring people to actually have conversations that they were afraid to have before. And I tweaked the film slightly based on that impact, and then started to bring it to communities and even school districts. And I was the main person facilitating the discussion. And I think the smallest screening I ever did was maybe 5 people, and the largest was 2,700 people. And it was incredible because I would get educators and school counselors and psychologists say, there's no way that you're going to get 1,500, let alone 2,700 students to sit in a gymnasium for 90 minutes and not cause any problems. And it was so funny. There were some principals that I would say, okay, we need to shut the lights off. And they say, are you crazy? And I said, yeah, well, let the film do its job. But if you keep the lights on, they're never going to get lost in the movie. So he said, okay, I'll do that, but I'm turning them right back on if there's any issues. And it was incredible because after, I would say about 10, 15 minutes, the students would get locked in and they'd watch this movie for 90 minutes. And what they learned about each other just by their reaction was incredible to watch, because no one was talking, while the film was playing, unless they were talking about what happened in the film. And then they look over, and I had students tell me this, is that I looked over, I saw my friend crying, my best friend crying at a part that I was crying, and I never thought he would cry at that part. And then following the film, I'd facilitate these discussions. And what I found was so interesting is that the film essentially united people, and under this common feeling that I just saw myself in these characters, in some of these situations. And it helped these students realize that, we saw each other together. And it started to make me understand the differences between the people that I have been walking the halls of this campus with for so many months and know nothing about, and made me wonder more about what I don't know, just like I got to understand more about these characters that I didn't know. The impact that I saw was like that, and that was universal. But then the impact that we found after the fact was pretty powerful too. We had youth check themselves into support services following it. We had, I remember specifically, I had one youth come up to me and tell me, my friend was quiet the whole day after watching the movie. And then that night she went home and told her mom that she had been engaging in self-harm for months. Mom had no clue what was going on. And the experience provoked her to actually have that conversation about something that she was struggling with. We had students that were contemplating suicide, go into a principal's office and ask to have their parents called so they can engage in a conversation about the thoughts that they were having. We had parents. I had emails from parents telling me I hadn't been able to have a meaningful conversation with my daughter for the last 7 months. And after watching this movie, my daughter came home and couldn't stop talking to me. Thank you for, creating something that provoked a conversation that I've been dying to have. So, and I'm saying this as, now as a producer looking back and saying, look what happened when these people watched the film, is that it sparked these conversations. And I think that is the universal. And a lot of people come up to me and say, well, oh, that's a good film, or I liked your film. Some people tell me that they hated the film. I love the fact that they hated it too, because it means they had some type of emotional reaction, which provokes them to want to tell somebody about it. And that is what we want to create. It's the conversation. I mean, art is subjective, right? I could tell you that I like Leonard Skinner or Nirvana, and you could tell me I don't really like those bands. The thing is that we can still talk about them. We can talk about how it makes us feel, what we do like, what we connect to, what we don't connect to. And the purpose of making this movie is not to make something that people come back and say, I really liked it, or it's a good film. It's to have that conversation. You know, when I grew up, watching content was a collective experience, because we had to watch it when, you know, the episode was
when
on.
it was on, yeah.
Yeah. If you rented a movie, you went to Blockbuster. Now I'm really dating myself, but you know, you brought home 1 to 3 movies, and everybody was excited because we're going to watch it together. Now there's so much.
You got to beat and rewind too. Don't forget that.
Yeah, and you had to rewind, but you know, it doesn't scare me, but it makes me take a step back, because now I'm raising two girls in a house, and there's enough bandwidth in the house where everybody in the family can go into a separate room and watch something. And there's no time for conversations, questions, or discussion. And we kind of saw that unfold with 13 Reasons Why. Parents were going crazy because everybody was watching the show on their own. And when something provocative or something that a student or, you know, a younger child didn't understand, there was nobody there to ask the question to engage in that conversation, to provide understanding and perspective. And back in the day, we were forced to do that. And I think that now that's why I believe it's so important to have content that sparks this conversation, because I think the conversation is more important than the content itself.
I'm glad you said that. You know, you started off by talking about the sort of shared experience. And so it made me think, well, you know, is the film, you know, really most appropriately situated in a context where you can show it to lots of people so that they all have that common experience of viewing it together. And then, of course, you started to talk about the young woman that went home and disclosed to her mom and couldn't stop talking to her mom. And that was, you know, precipitated by the film. So, you know, how, given the kind of seclusion that we find ourselves capable of having, even in, you know, as Sherry Turkle says, alone together, that we can be in the same house under the same roof and yet, right, so distant from each other. How should people, you know, those that are watching this either now or will watch this, hopefully if we can, you know, persuade them to watch the recording of it at some point, right? As people are watching this discussion, right, how should they use the film, right? What is the ideal sort of use of this film for an individual or a family? How do you recommend them sort of go about getting the film and watching it and using it?
Well, the one thing I'll say is it's a movie. I mean, it is a movie, and I think a lot of people are looking at it and saying, "Oh my gosh, you need all of these tools in place to be able to watch this movie." If you compare the content that's in this movie compared to what teenagers are going over in the weekends and watching from like Deadpool 2 or whatever, the content in this film is it's emotionally heavy, but it's not, you know, heavier than what is being shown on CNN or all of these other venues. It's just real. It's something that really impacts people because it's real. But I want to say that it's a movie. So we get lost in interpretation of a reality that I've created that is not necessarily the reality that I want us to live. It's a reality that I want us to learn from. Now, I think at the core, we have to understand that what the film is focusing on, and focusing on these critical mental health issues, predominantly focused on youth and the relationships with parents. So I think the first thing is to understand that that's what this is focusing on. And that if you're going to be showing it to a group of people, that you understand that, okay, this audience is PG-13 or above, and you understand what this content is going to be. I believe that the ideal situation is a collective, like a family, parents and their teenage sons or daughters, and watching the film together to have this experience. And then the first questions that I would ask after having this experience is, did you connect to any of the characters in this film? Did you feel that any of the storylines in this film are relevant? Or do you think that they're just not true and not relevant? Could you not connect to the characters? And then ask the question of why. Why could you connect to this character? What about this character did you find yourself more drawn to? Or why couldn't you connect to this character? And if you didn't like this movie, what did you think wasn't real or wasn't authentic? If the film made you really sad, why did it make you so sad? If the film made you laugh, what made you laugh with the film? If it made you angry, why did it make you angry? The thing is that I think at the core, it's asking those questions. And it goes back to this concept that we started this conversation with, is this, what does listening really mean? It's an active act. Most of the conversations today that we engage in are revolving around management and administration in one-word answers. And what I would like people to do is really ask questions that provoke people to think and respond in an authentic way, and be active in how you pay attention so you can ask another question. And that's how I would provoke the conversations when I would do a group screenings, whether it was 20 people or 2,000. The first question I would ask is, how many of you, could relate to some aspect of this film? How many of you are glad you got the chance to see the movie? How many of you think more youth should see the film? How many of you think more parents should see the film? How many of you think educators should see the film? What character do you connect to and why? And those are those open-ended questions that get people to talk. And then if you're actively listening, it's going to guide the next question, which is probably going to take you to a place that you never imagined you'd go.
Well, I've tried to be actively listening, and I just sort of snickered to myself because literally almost as soon as you said, what actor do you connect with, two actors actually just popped into our waiting room. So I'm gonna bring one over, and Mark Daugherty. Hopefully he can pop in here real quick, and we can get his perspective. So here he comes. Mark, are you with us? Two actors actually just popped into our waiting room, so I'm gonna bring one over, and I'm hearing some feedback maybe from. There we go. Hey, Mark.
Hey, how are you?
Hey,
doing
Mark.
well, man.
Hey. Quarantining.
Good
This
to
is
see
fun. You as well.
I like it. You got
so
the mic
we were-
and everything. You're looking good.
Yes, I know. I do a little voiceover, so I had to call back in my living room. So
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's strange that we're seeing everybody's houses nowadays, right? So
yeah. So
we were
intimate.
just talking about kind of, when people are watching this film, what are some of the important kind of conversations and prompts to ask people? And Aram just said one of them is, what's a character that you identified with and why? And so just talk a little bit about your character, who you played, and how it resonated with you personally, and how sort of you want people to see the impact of your character on their abilities to listen to others in their lives.
Yeah, I would definitely say the first thing that kind of drew me to June and my character was this overwhelming sense of wanting to have a friend. And I think no matter where you are in life, whatever abilities that you have, I think my character definitely was on the spectrum. But regardless, I found this core kind of bridge into his world by empathizing and having real life experience of wanting to have a friend. So I think that was the biggest thing for me. And then listening to understand and not respond, which I think so much of like culture and at least my upbringing was like always listening to respond and being able to jump in and acknowledge something, but reversing that and having it be something that you can really understand. And I think amidst this crisis, it's really been a skill that I've taken away from the movie and really gleaned, especially right now.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Yes, I mean, so your character, to me, resonated most with. I've got a daughter who's just an animal person.
Love.
I mean, her first word was, "I want a dog." Like
I say that every day.
hands down. Yeah, I mean, now they're wanting rabbits and all kinds of stuff, right? There's always a new animal, every day, and so it reminded me, and it kind of put that in my head is to try to personalize it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's meaningful. So I want to bring in another actor here. We can maybe get some conversation going. I don't know how much you guys stay in contact with each other. Maybe this will be kind of a little family reunion as well.
Yeah.
So Maynard Alvarado played Benny in the movie. Maynard, are you here with us?
Oh, hello. Can you guys see me?
Hey, how are you today?
Can't see you yet, Maynard.
Uh-oh,
Sorry.
let's unmute him.
There it is.
There it is, Maynard.
Hey.
Hi, everyone.
How's it going?
So yeah,
It's going. It's going, right?
Still going.
It's still going.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and who you played in the movie.
Oh, so my name is Maynard Alvarado, and I played Benny Ramirez in the movie. Ramirez, that was his last name, right, Aaron?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
I remember.
There's gonna be a quiz after this.
I know, right?
So just from your perspective, tell us a little bit about what the movie meant to you, why you decided to get involved with it, and maybe just a little but about kind of the lessons we might take away from your character in particular as it relates to how we listen to others.
Oh, well, you want to say hi? My son's here, so he wants to say hi. So,
Hey, awesome, cool. Hey, man, what's up?
So big now.
Yeah, man. My character, Benny Ramirez was like, I felt like he was born into that environment, and I come from that environment. My uncle was he's part of gangs and stuff like that, so I was always around it, and so was Benny. So that's how I related to it. And when I first read the script, I told Aaron, well, it was just a table read at the first time I read the script. It was just a table read, and I felt like I had to be part of this this film, only because the character was calling out my name. So I was like, wow, it just I had, like, every time I read it, I envisioned my uncle, and I was like, wow, I need to tell this story because I know this story. So once I read it, I asked Aaron or Brooke and Aaron, was like, hey, can I get an audition for this character? He's like, yeah, we'll have an auditions in March. I was like, cool. So yeah, I had to be part of it. I had to tell my side of the story of where I come from and the environment that Benny was part of.
It was personal to you. I mean, you really resonated with that specific character.
Oh yeah, definitely. Very, very close.
Yeah, that's a true story. When we basically assembled a group of actors to read the script, just to read through the script at the table read, what it's called. And I'll distinctly remember Maynard coming up to us and saying, "I'm Benny." And we said, that's great. You just read the role. And he said, yeah. No, I'm Benny. And he said, I need to audition for this. So, and he was Benny.
And I think we've got Benny's mom here too, Rosa. Is that right?
Karen.
Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, Karen's here. Karen, can you hear us?
I can, yes.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can't see you, which is fine if you don't have camera.
Yes, let me see. There you go. Can you?
Hey, Karen.
There she is.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey.
So this is kind of a question for all the actors, and Aaron, you as well, and that's one of the critiques that I've heard from people who've watched the film, and I've sought out their input, is there's no hope. That it's an hour and 45 minutes, and it really gets you into this depression and this funk, and the majority of the film is just simply highlights how negative our daily lives can be, how depressing you know, and how mean-spirited, you know, individuals can be, from kids all the way to adults. Is that a fair assessment? Is there no hope in the film? What do you say to those critics that might say, where's the hope? I don't see the hope.
I don't see the what? I'm sorry, and my volume is not
The
that
hope.
great.
Hope.
Oh, yeah, I don't see the hope.
The hope. Well, I
Yeah.
think the part of what I'm most interesting as a person is how to break cycles, you know. That's one of the things that fascinates me always. What is it, the thing that makes you break a cycle? Because we all have patterns where we come from, and the kind of teachings and the world that we grew up. And sometimes when you're born in poverty, you die in poverty. If you're born in a violent environment, you end up dying on violence. Like, you know, all of these things that continue to repeat itself. So this film, it shows you exactly that tiny window of possibility to get out of that. And I think that's extremely hopeful. That's beyond hopeful, because sometimes we find ourselves trapped. I find myself trapped in many things that I'm trying to overcome from my upbringing, you know. Some great things that they're working out for me, but some other ones that they're not. And I'm always interested in finding out how I can get out of the vicious cycle. So in this case, with my family in the film, you know, domestic violence, poverty, single mother, overwhelmed. You're like, how is she gonna be able to get out of this? It feels hopeless, right? But not really. She just chooses for a second to listen to the counselor and ask for help. And that's really her window out. So I think those are the most empowering moments that anybody can find in their lives.
I believe Benny did find hope at the end, and especially when the counselor kept pushing him to you know, go on his side. There was a point where Benny actually didn't see any hope, didn't find any hope when he shaved his head. That's when I felt like, you know, whatever, I'm all in now. There's no hope for me. There's no hope for like a better future for me. There's no hope for to be somebody different. That was a change that Aaron and I talked about. Like, he's like, can you shave your head? Because this is the impact moment where, you know, we kind of have to feel like Benny gives it all for the gang. He's like, you know what? There's nothing else, to just give up and give it to him. And he shaves his head. And that was a very special moment. And I feel like that moment for me was like my character died. For him, being the good guy, he died at that moment, and then he came back to life as a different person. But when Micah, the counselor, came looking for me, there was hope. There's just that 1% of help that he needed. That 1% that, you know, there's 99%. That 1% was him. And then he went back to him, and he's like, he opened up to him. He made him feel real. He made him feel more like, there is hope, kid. Just look at it. And he kind of convinced him, like, all right. And he, you know, when he's taking down the room, he's moving now. You can see it, everything, like that shot when he's looking at it. It was like, there's light over him, like that light above him. That gave him that hope. So there is hope. And there was hope for Benny.
Yeah, I definitely think June had a lot of hope at the end. He got a puppy. But I think more than anything,
There's a lot of hope in puppies. I got to say that.
oh my gosh, I wish I had that puppy right now. But I think like the smallest gesture, no matter how big or small, I think can really change the course of somebody's life. And I think, you know, for June's life, getting a new, you know, lifelong best friend, there was such redemption in that. And I think there is hope at the end. I think you just have to understand that it may not have as many ribbons and bows on it, but at least we're on a different side of awakening with it. So.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Well, I was going to say they explained it beautifully, and I think that ultimately it goes back to what we were talking about, the ability to pay attention. You know, like Karen said, there's a window, and often it takes a moment to find that window, to see that window, to truly listen to the opportunity that you have. And often we are so blinded by what we have going on in our head, like that cycle that we continue to get caught in. And it's not until we kind of take a step back, just like Benny did, you know, when he's taking down the stuff in that room and realizing, you know, no matter what we face in life, you know, our perspective and how we learn to pay attention to the opportunities that, even if they're a tiny, tiny sliver of an opportunity, they can take us in a direction that will lead to a different path and break that cycle. And, you know, one of the things with what Mark was saying about June with regards to the gift he gets at the end, you know, it's a very subtle moment that is connected to the character Cal. And a lot of people say, I love the fact that you don't see who gives that gift to June. He's not comfortable, you know, making it known that, look, I'm sorry for what I did. I want to connect to you. He's not ready for that. And just like in life, some of us are not entirely ready, but still that act, that intention, that step in that direction is showing that there is hope for him too, even though he was one of the most callous, abusive characters in the film. And so I think that the hope is laced through the film. You just have to learn to pay attention to where it is.
So I brought in here Kyle Zamchik. She runs an organization called Listenly. And hey, how's it going? I want to, this is kind of a question for everybody. I want to start with Maynard, because I think it directly speaks to something you said a minute ago about your character Benny, and it's this kind of this tension that you really beautifully portray in the movie of the counselor kind of wanting to help, and I kind of, you know, maybe put that in quotes, that the counselor wanting to listen and the resistance to that help, you know, maybe partly because, you know, it's really hard to admit that we need help, right?
Right.
And so how did you think about that, you know, in terms of your own life and your character that you're playing in the movie, and, you know, in terms of this tension of asking for help, and then, you know, once you're done, I'll kind of want to throw that same, kind of leave that same question out there, particularly for those of you like Michael and Tom and Kyle who listen for a living, and kind of wanting to bring people in and you know, expose them to the power of being listened to, and yet the resistance that we often face with people saying, like, I don't need that, or that's not for me, or some sort of stigma because, like, I need some help. So can you talk a little bit about that tension?
Well, as for myself, I mean, I'm kind of like timid. I'm not timid, but like restrained from, like, no, I don't need help. I like to do my, you know, my own things. We like restrain from, like, oh, I'm okay. When I need help, I'll ask for it. But that's the problem. It comes out a little too late, right? Like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I mean, it's a little too. Sorry.
That's okay. We're good.
It's a little too late. You're in a deep hole now. I can't help you. When I asked you for help is when I thought you needed the most help, you know? As for Benny, my character, he is not gonna ask for help. You know, I felt like he is not gonna, he's like, I grew up without a father figure. So for him to have a guy come in and say, hey, let me help you, was kind of like, for what? Where have you been? Where has this help been all my life? So Benny was not gonna ask for help. He's been doing this stuff all his life. He's been doing it as much as he can. He doesn't need it. He had the help that he wanted was, you know, the bad side, the gang. Like, oh, we are here for you. We are the help that all you need. You know, he's been convinced that he needs them only. He can make money off of them. He can trust them. He can need that stuff. So for Benny, help. And then at the end, when Micah kept pushing him, like, hey, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. It took a while for him to actually believe this guy until he opened up to himself. Look, I'm gonna tell you something secret, but you know, you gotta balance here with me, you know. And he told him the secret, and he's like, you opened up to me. Another person opened up to me. So like, okay.
And then compare that to, you know, to Mark's character June, right? Like, who's seeking help,
yeah,
and yet is denied any kind of recognition that his problem is a problem.
Yes.
It's, you know, you lost a pet, like, who cares, right? You don't have a real problem. Did you feel that, Mark? What did you feel about this notion of like kind of being vulnerable, like the power of being vulnerable, and then of course the power of when, you know, that vulnerability isn't reciprocated?
Yeah, I think that was a skill I was still learning, probably going into this production, is just articulating my needs and knowing how to ask for help, and maybe for me in a more pointed way. And I think throughout this process, it gave me a lot of tools to be able to learn to do that. And I think we've all experienced those people who don't recognize our ask sometimes. And I think that also comes down to communicating on our ends. I feel like I've been learning on both ends and really trying to meet people where they're at too, to really listen when they ask for help in their own language, I guess.
Kyle or Michael or Tom, what do you guys say about like doing this, you know, as professional listeners? How do you deal with this tension? Where does this tension sit? Where does it come from?
I think one of the things that we try to do is truly pay attention to people, pay attention, observe, and notice everything that you possibly can, and especially the things that aren't said. To pay attention to what's not being said, pay attention to where someone's eyes are, just pay attention to someone's body language. All of that helps too, and shows. I think it shows people that they are important and that they matter. It's also about being present with them, not being distracted, not letting distractions get in the way. You know, being just extremely intentional, and to just keep doing that. That eventually people, when we're not used to that, it's easy to think that no one cares. But if we can continue to show that we're paying attention, that we're present, we're not going anywhere emotionally, that helps to diffuse, I think, some of the tension. It's one aspect.
Yeah, I love what's being shared, and I want to make sure I understand your question correctly, Graham. Are you talking about like which tension, like what's the tension you're specifically speaking to, just so I can address it?
Well, there's a tension inside the person who kind of realizes that they can't handle something, and yet vulnerability isn't cool. Vulnerability isn't something that we lift up into society as something that we ought to laud and praise and say, you know, everybody who's vulnerable gets, gets $1 million. It's not, we're a very kind of individualistic, culture in a lot of ways. And so there's a tension inside the person who's going to share. And then of course there's a tension inside the listener who, what do I do? I want to fix it. And so there's all kinds of tensions. I think the one that I specifically was looking at, particularly from Benny's character, is this, ability to actually share out and be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Like why is that so hard, and how do you sort of make it okay?
Yeah, that's such an important question. And I love, Mark, what you said around the language and accessibility of language. And I think where I exist and where Listenly and a lot of the amazing projects, like I love what Michael and Tom are doing, is how do you make this as accessible as possible to where somebody is at right now? Because like you're saying, Graham, in some circle, it's not cool, but a variation of it is. And there's different things that are permissioned in different cultures and different communities. So how do you meet somebody where they're at and you make it cool because it's part of whatever that subculture is permissioning? And I think as a larger society, there's a wave, Brene Brown has done a lot for vulnerability and making that word vulnerability okay and allowed. What is everyone's thoughts on listening? Like taking a pulse of the community you're with. Is that a stigmatized word? In some cultures it might be, in others it won't be. And I think just being really radically honest with ourselves and each other about, where is this community or the people who I'm talking to at with this, and what is cool and what is socially acceptable, and how do we just start permissioning that and then opening the door more and more. So that's mostly.
I mean, it definitely goes back to.
Hmm?
Yeah, it goes back to something Aaron said at the beginning, which is, we're not taught how to do this very well at all. I mean, not even just well, just like, and the fact that we have terms in our culture like think before you speak, but have you ever heard someone say think before you listen? And so we're so speaking centered, and kind of that's who controls the conversation, when there's volumes of research that suggest the opposite of that, which is the listener actually drives the direction of conversations much more than speakers. There's much power, unrecognized power and potential in listening, and therefore there's much power and potential in sharing to someone who is really open and paying attention to you and being present in the moment with you. We go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say, in the first 7 minutes of the movie, there's a very key line that, for me, outlines exactly what I'm telling the audience not to do. And it begins with the opening, not where the drone shots, but it's once we get into the house of Josh and his father. And the father is listening to the report on the radio about what had happened. And he's making a snide comment. And I think that, this happens a lot today. When somebody makes a comment about how they feel, and it could possibly be negative. I think there's a lot of negativity that's flowing. And then Josh comes into the dining room table to engage with his father. His father says, the world's going to hell because of crazy kids like that. And Josh says, well, maybe there's something we don't know about him. And then what does his father do? He mocks him. Josh, he's a sociopath. He's psycho. He's sick in the head. The world doesn't need him. Isn't that enough? And Josh tries to say the one thing that I planted in there as what I believe we shouldn't do. And he says, I just don't think we should judge. And I think that tension is really rooted in judgment. And it was the same thing for Benny's character, is that the whole time he was afraid to be judged by whatever was around him, including this counselor. And it was only until, like Kyle said, this idea of being vulnerable. One of my friends, Mark Golston, who wrote a book, ironically called Just Listen. And in the book, he has this chapter called Show 'em Your Neck. And I love it because it's about like the chicken, he's going to show him his neck with fear of possibly losing it. But once you showed that you're vulnerable, which the counselor does in that scene, then Benny shares his vulnerability back. We remove that judgment. And I think that it's so key to diffusing that tension, is that we have to offer something of ourselves before the people return that same offering.
That's beautiful. I was laughing when you started talking about that opening scene. I got a message from, and I think she's probably watching, Danica Treble. She's Tom and Michael, you guys know her as well. And she said I was 3 minutes into the movie and already heated at the dad. She's getting mad because she's like, no, that's, and it's beautiful that you just said, like, you planted it there as kind of the almost one of the main themes throughout the movie, which is this notion of the negative power and potential of judgment, and the positive power of curiosity and openness, and sort of letting down our guard and sharing our own vulnerability so that other people, and for some characters like, Benny, it takes a long time, and it takes multiple interactions to have somebody open up. And for other characters like Mark's character, like they're there and they're ready to be open, and yet they can't find somebody to accept that openness, right? But even in the relationship between, Benny and Rosa, there's an openness that is sort of sometimes open and sometimes closed. And so in some characters, there's this, sometimes we listen well and sometimes we don't. And, it's clear that we don't always do what we know we should do when we should do it with as much, positivity as we should be doing it, right? So, we have recognized along the way kind of the cultural moment we're in, and not just COVID-19, but that's clearly the story of the day. But just more generally, the deep-seated divisions, the us versus them, that kind of othering mentality that just really seems so pervasive. And as Michael said at the beginning, not just in this country, but around the world. What is this world in need of right now? Anybody that has some thoughts on, how can this film lend insight into what we need? Is it just listening? Is listening part of a larger package? Like, what is it what is your answer or your sort of at least partial solution for what we need to start turning this tide of sort of deepening division and rancor and us versus them mentality?
I've got some thoughts, if I may, and it also speaks to, Graham, something you brought up before about that part of the listener. I think last time I spoke more of a speaker. What does it take to open up that side? But I think as people often want to add value, and I think when they're listening, they think that value looks like either like solving the problem or perceived problem, or I think that's often what people misinterpret listening to be. And I think or I guess they want to solve the problem, or they want to seem smart, or they want to seem valuable or appear valuable because that makes them feel better. And I think what that's missing is, how do we just get back in touch with our own curiosity? And how does everyone feel empowered that being curious and curious about somebody else's experience is enough? And I think listening can feel overwhelming. It's like, oh, am I listening well? Am I doing a good enough job? And that's scary when people want to be valuable. And instead of saying, hey, my job isn't to do some miraculous thing or ask the best question, it's just to allow myself to be curious about somebody else. And if somebody is sad, it's not my responsibility to fix it, because in a way you're denying that other person the agency that they have to take care of themselves. And how can you say, I can be curious about that sadness? And what's a real, genuine curiosity I have? That's some of my thoughts on it.
Also, I was thinking, with this whole experience with the COVID-19, I have experienced that it doesn't matter the kind of possessions or the financial status that we have. We all experiencing struggle, either internal, external, all kinds. So for me, I feel that the importance of listening to yourself, listening to what others are experiencing, and listening really to our planet, it all comes down to that, to really understand what can we get out of this experience that we're going through. Because they say when you lose something, don't lose the lesson. Gain something with what you're experiencing. So whatever is difficulties, is struggle, loneliness, by listening to what we're going on, who we're gonna come out of this, what do we want to do to humanity now? I think is very important, and to truly connect and understand that this whole trendy hashtag, that people are using, it really means something, that not what is going on outside of ourselves is not affecting us, but it's deeply affecting us. So we need to really start to pay attention.
Thank you.
I'll interject too. First off, just thanks to everybody for giving me some grace here. I was a little late to this call. I was given blood here in central Pennsylvania and it was really backed up. Anyways, I'm happy to be a part of the conversation as well. And I really enjoyed the film. And I say one of the messages that I hope can be evoked here is just this idea of shared common humanity. I know it was in another call with Graham earlier today, and that came up in conversation. I would hope that as a result of like COVID, that people just are really entering more deeply into each other's lives and stories. I was just thinking, as someone was just speaking a minute ago, the day that it was announced here in central Pennsylvania by the governor that all non-essential businesses were going to be closed. Our office, for someone to tell it to, just happens to be right up the street from the Capitol building, the state capitol in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And that day, it was amazing. It was like a total ghost town in Harrisburg. And Michael and I had to walk up the street to the post office, and there just happened to be a man on the steps of the Capitol, and we just happened to engage him. You know, we could have easily passed right by him and he could have passed by us, but we both took the moment and had this shared common experience of what just had happened earlier that day, of the governor making this announcement and how much it was going to be affecting him. He was actually a homeless veteran, and all of the food shelters were going to be closed down. And so, you know, we couldn't fix his problem or his situation in that moment, but we could just absolutely empathize just the fact that this was going to be a whole new way of being for everybody involved. And this was going to affect us and our nonprofit and our personal lives and our families. And so we just had this shared moment together. And I think, yeah, to me, if there's one overarching goal, I would hope the film and just COVID and all that we're experiencing, going through right now, is just this idea of shared common humanity, that we're in this life together.
Yeah, I mean, some of the lessons that you hear people learning and sharing out is, you know, abilities to be more present, which is a key component, right, of listening well, is to, as Michael said earlier, to center yourself and to be present and give your full attention to that other person. So, you know, I don't always do a good job of that, if I'm honest, you know, but I think what COVID at least allows me to do is to at least keep it always in front of my conscious mind that, you know, deadlines and other kinds of things can, you know, something is not going to catch on fire if I, you know, don't turn to the book chapter, you know, tomorrow. Things will be okay, right? And not everybody has that convenience with their work situation, and so we all have our, you know, our fires and so forth. But hopefully this is allowing us to slow down a little bit and pay attention and rethink what's important, right? To rethink what is it in our lives that is important. We had a question from. Go ahead.
If I may, Graham, I just want to interject, because I love what Tom said about the shared humanity, and I think that,
yeah,
you know, connected to what you just said, I think one of the biggest challenges for human beings is to realize that this is a practice. It's something that we have to work at every day and make it a priority in order for it to develop into a habit. And I think that there's so many forces driving us, you know, in society right now to work longer hours, make enough money, buy certain things. And we're torn in so many different places and directions and ways. And I think that we have to make this a practice that's a priority in our lives in order to learn how to pay more attention, to acknowledge that shared humanity. And I think if people could actually take that moment to do that, whether it's start with 2 minutes a day and work on to 5 minutes a day, and hopefully it gets a little bit longer. If we can all start with 1 minute and work our way up to 5, imagine the connections and the awareness that we could all develop. And if we could focus on coaching ourselves away from that judgment too. There's so much that's me against you, us against them these days, that I think it's so paramount for us to realize that we're all in this together, and remind ourselves of that we don't have to be right. You don't have to be wrong. It's just that we need to be together.
One of the places where we start, as Tom said, is what do we have in common? And the fact is, we all are insecure sometimes. We all feel lonely sometimes. We all are uncertain sometimes. We all experience loss. We all have fears. And we're anxious about something. Uh, they're just things that we have so much in common. And if we can start at that place, knowing that all of us struggle, we all want to be loved. Simply, we want to be loved and we want to be heard. Understanding those things, believing that is the real start to listening well, we believe, and believing that everyone has worth and value and has a right to be heard and a voice to share. All of that makes a difference, and it helps us, we hope, to be less judgmental because judgment just slams doors shut and makes people feel unsafe, and they're not going to open up if they don't feel safe. And so our job is to help people feel safe, not judged.
So we've got a question, and we've touched on really more of the motivational component of quality listening, compassionate listening, empathic listening, whatever adjective you want to put in front of the term listening. So the question is, how do we encourage more empathic listening? The questioner goes on to say, it's one thing to be a convert, but I still struggle with getting others to stop defaulting to listening to their inner voice when they should be listening to the person on the other side of the table. So, Aaron, you said it's a practice, but of course, what we know is that you can, practice doesn't make perfect if what you're practicing is wrong. If what you're practicing doesn't get you to, be the type of presence that someone else is going to sort of benefit from. So what are the components of that practice that people can start doing right now? So the people watching right now, what can they go start practicing specifically?
I think it begins with openness, that we have to be open to the different thoughts, feelings, and opinions that others have, and not be quick to push our thoughts and opinions. Just be open to understanding, to paying attention to how someone else thinks and feels, and not feel the urge to judge and refute or contradict. I think the second most important is silence. We have to be silent to allow someone to continue the conversation. And you see this play out in the scene between Josh and his dad. His father is everything that a listener is not. He is not open to his son's opinion. His son offers opinion. Maybe there's something we don't know about. His father mocks him. He's not silent. And the third is curiosity. The father is not curious about how Josh feels that way. And often, we're not interested in what the thoughts and feelings are. We just want the answer. And I think that often we think the answer is the most important thing, where the curious questions are the most important thing, because the curious questions will get us to those important responses so we understand. And awareness, it was discussed earlier, I think Michael said, there's a saying, action speaks louder than words. And that saying is rooted in fact that 55% of the meaning of what people communicate is through their actions. 38% of the meaning is through sounds, and only 7% of the meaning is through words. So what are we missing that is not being said? And we need to be aware of that. And when that communication doesn't line up, and then ask more curious questions to understand why we're seeing it not line up. And then finally, I think it's the idea of respect, practicing respect. I hear what you're saying. I see what you're saying. I feel what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. Words like that will continue the communication. And we need to reassure the people that we are connecting with that we are respecting what they say, whether we disagree with what they're saying or not. So I think openness, silence, curiosity, awareness, and respect are the keys. Oscar. It's an easy way of remembering it. Practicing often.
Gotta have a pneumatic.
Mhm.
I think it starts with
Good.
that. And here's the thing, as a suggestion, what I say to when I teach classes is there's no way you're going to walk around going Oscar, Oscar, Oscar. The challenge, I believe, is that you pick the one that's hardest for you to do. For me, it's keep silent, as you can see. You pick the one that's most difficult and then use the technology you have to remind you of the one to focus on. And my challenge is to do it for 21 days straight. Have it pop up. If it's silent, silent, be silent, be silent, be silent, be silent. Remind yourself. That's how you begin to practice. And then it will adopt into a habit. And then move on to the next hardest one. Maybe it's being curious because you don't really care. Practice that curiosity and work through those four. And I guarantee that if you can work through all four of those for the next 160 days, it will change the way you communicate. It will change the nature of your relationship. I guarantee it.
I think just to
Kyle?
add to that is, and I love that, and I think there are like high level ways where we can sit with that, and things like being present and open. I also think sometimes we don't incorporate play enough, and there's a lot of ways to have fun. And the getting like listening is juicy. It's exciting when you really hear what's happening in somebody's world. And I think opening up, I mean, there's like authentic relating games, or there's so many practices and games, or somebody, Jan Keck, he has these cards, curiosity cards. And I think it's cropping up all around us, but looking for ways to have fun and incorporate it as part of being and spending quality time with each other, especially since everyone is hopping in remotely. What do you do for 5 minutes at the top of hopping on a remote call to engage with each other? Is it a check-in and everyone takes 30 seconds to say, where am I actually at right now in this moment? Like, that's a great way to become stronger listeners, is to just build in practices. Like you were saying, like it's all about practices, but how do we also let those practices be fun? Because it doesn't have to be so serious all the time too.
I like that. Have fun. Tom?
Yeah, I was just thinking, we love to tell this story. We have a really close friend of ours, and we talk periodically, maybe once a month on the phone. He lives several states away from us. And every time we get on the phone, he always, not always, but generally he asks us, so don't tell me about all the good stuff. Tell me about what really sucks and what's hard. Because what we've found, and I think some of the callers here today have referenced it, is just this vulnerability. True vulnerability occurs when life is hard. I mean, we can all share a lot of things that we're grateful for, and we could probably list a whole bunch of things right now that we can celebrate together. But I think what really fosters deep connection is when we can share the things that are really challenging about life, and we can do it in a way, as Michael mentioned, that is safe, and people aren't going to judge us or shame us or make us feel less than for anything that we tell them in that place and in that moment. And I think we as a society, I remember I'm a parent of 4 small kids, and so we've watched this movie several times, and I'd recommend it to everybody. It's called Inside Out. It's a Pixar film, came out maybe a decade ago. It's such a powerful movie, because I referenced this in a podcast of ours recently, that in that movie, they kind of parse out several of the common human experiences that we have, emotions like fear and anger, and we as human beings oftentimes put joy at the top. Like, we should be shooting for joy, and yes, we all want joy, absolutely, but like, joy is not everything. I mean, all of the human emotions are important, and they serve a purpose. And so what really fosters deep connection is when we can share about what makes us angry, what makes us fearful. Getting back to the movie, I think one of the things I most resonate with, and forgive me for not being able to remember everybody's names, but the character you were sharing about, just the dog, and anybody who has a pet and is attached to a pet, we get all connect with that scene. And for him to be able to express his emotions over this dog and how much it means to him, that's a really hard thing. It's a really vulnerable thing. but that is what's ultimately going to foster deep relationships, is being able to share those hard things and have people who respond with grace and empathy and compassion.
Absolutely. All the emotions, right? And the fact that you can experience more than just one emotion. You don't have to just pigeonhole yourself into, anger and that's true both in the moment and in particular circumstances, as well as growing up in the South as a boy. It was okay for me to express anger, but nothing else, right? I couldn't express other kinds of emotions. They weren't as okay, which means that I was socialized to basically channel all of the emotions that I feel through the expression of anger. And so I've got to relearn and rewire. And it took me, 20, 30 years to learn that. And so it's going to take me, maybe that long, or at least half that long, to kind of retrain. And so I think going back to what Aaron said about this being a practice, we didn't become the way we are overnight. We didn't form the habits of listening that we have overnight. And so we can't change those necessarily in an instant and all of a sudden be the kind of listener that we want to be. And the fact that it's idiosyncratic, that, Kyle might like a little bit more X, Y, and Z, and Tom might like a little bit more A, B, and C in their listening, kind of like a recipe, right? That it's not, I'm not going to give you a book and you're going to read it and all of a sudden you're going to know exactly what to do in every situation to be a listener. It's something that we have to mess up. It's something we have to fail. Unfortunately, it's the same thing with being a parent, right? Sometimes you got to fail. Sometimes you got to, right, just make a mistake and then admit to your kids, you know what, that was wrong. And I'm sorry that I acted that way. And I'm sorry that I did that. And that's one of the things that you don't see as much in the movie, which maybe is a lesson, right, is the ability for parents, to fail. And I think there's some snippets of that, in the movie, but clearly with Josh's character, right, for instance, right, the father never admits, right, the father's always right. The same thing with the older brother. I can't remember that character's name, but that older brother is always right. And so that's maybe one of the things to learn here is humility as well, is that we're going to mess up. And even somebody like myself or Michael or Tom or Aaron, who've been looking at and studying listening for 20 plus years, I don't have all the answers either.
I'm a father. I'm learning every day, and I'm constantly calling myself on the mistakes that I make, and if they've happened the prior day, I apologize the next day and say, this is what I should have done, and I'm going to commit to handling it better the next time. And that's why I go back. It's a practice, and I think it's whether you make it a priority. That's the key.
So we started this conversation sort of acknowledging that, although we're hosting this on Listen First Project channels, the promotion and the getting people to watch this movie is a collaboration. That's why we brought Tom and Michael from Someone to Tell It To. That's why we today was in another call with Kyle and said, you know what, you need to be in this call at 3:00. And so she graciously showed up. Because she's also part of this larger coalition, this larger collaboration, and it's called Weaving Community. The website is weaving.us. It's supposed to go live today. It's a partnership between the National Conversation Project and David Brooks's Weave Social Fabric Project, where we're encouraging people to, like we've been talking about for the last almost hour and a half, slow down and think through what are you experiencing right now? What is it? What are your central emotions that you're experiencing? And do you have somebody that you can share those to? What we're asking people to do is called Let's Go There. And we want to basically let's go there, and we want to be real. We want to be real with our experiences, with our emotions. We want to ask questions like, what are you doing for yourself? Right. So KB, right, you mentioned this, listening to ourselves, taking care of ourselves, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, how are we going to be taking care of others? And then, of course, this came up as well as what is the world that you want, right? What can emerge from a moment like this? how can we solve challenges together? And of course, I'm biased because I've been doing this for so long, but I really think that listening is just the behavior, the mindset, the practice that can allow us to emerge together. If we're really paying attention to others, if we're really paying attention to ourselves, if we're really being honest with what we're feeling and that how our situation isn't the same as somebody else's situation, even in the same household, that even people in the same household are having different experiences, and that those experiences are valid because they are happening to that person from their perspective. And so, as Tom said earlier, to recognize that common humanity, and really try to lift others up in the process. And so that's what we're trying to do with the Weaving Community Campaign. And we're so happy that Listen, the movie, has partnered with us, and that we've been able to reach people through this movie and encourage people through this movie. And we're so happy for other partners who are there as listeners for those individuals who need someone to tell it to, who need that compassionate and empathic listener on the other end of a text, or the other end of a Zoom call, or the other end of a phone call, and hopefully very soon at the other end of a face-to-face interaction, when we can get back together and see each other, not just through a screen, but really sort of, right, personal, in the same space as each other. Aram, I'll leave you kind of a last word if you want to have it. What would you kind of tell people, not just, of course, watch the movie, because, we clearly want people to do that. But just more generally, what do you want to leave people with?
Well, what I would say is, now we have a moment, we have the time. And my oldest daughter is really frustrated by the fact that she cannot be in school with her friends. She feels like she's sometimes bored because she doesn't have something to do every moment of the day like she would in the previous normal life. And I think that we have an opportunity, as Karen mentioned about, we've seen the climate change, we've seen the environment change, we've seen people change, we've seen jobs start to change and evolve, businesses change. And I think it's an incredible opportunity for us as human beings to also evolve in a way that we've discussed today, in a way where we can maybe see things a little bit differently, because we have the time to take that moment to look. And I think the challenge that I have is for everybody to take a step back and think about where they could be missing those moments. Maybe there's things that they are not paying attention to. Maybe they're the people in their house. Maybe they're their children. Maybe it's their partner, their spouse. Maybe it's their grandmother or aunt who lives in another country or another state. Maybe it's your neighbor. I had an incredible opportunity to reconnect to these incredible actors and good friends of mine, which Mark.
Which, by the way, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I love these three and the rest of the cast that participated in this film, and I think you can tell by the way they answered those questions so authentically and from the heart. And I haven't had a chance to reconnect with them, and I was able to get on the phone with a few of them, and it started to make me realize that I need to do that more often with them, because I miss having these conversations. I miss connecting to them. And it wouldn't have been for this to make me realize that I need to reach out to Mark Maynor and Karen more often. And so I think the challenge and the ask is to take a step back and pay attention to where we can, foster those connections and maybe reconnect in a way to ourselves, to our families, to our friends, to our neighbors, to our coworkers, to the environment in a way that we never had before, because now we have this pause. And when we come out of this, how are we going to come out? Are we going to come out with a new perspective and a new behavior? Or are we going to go back to doing what we did before? And I think it starts with listening.
Beautiful. Thank you all for your time today. I really appreciate the connection and kind of making the film real through this, conversation. Bless you all and have a good start to your weekend.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
all.
everybody.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
inviting me in
Bye.
here.
Thanks for having me.
Much gratitude.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.